Sahel of Africa?
Yeah, yeah. So the thing is not just US and Russia.
Right.
It was inspired by this, as I say, letter. I will send you a copy of this letter as well. It was printed in Politico. And in this letter, about 100 experts now say that relations are horrible. Of course, they blamed everything on Russia.
We are ready to start.
All right. But still they say, yeah, Russia is horrible, but at least we have to try to do something to avoid the worst case scenario. So I will send you a letter which inspires this project. And we will talk, Matt Ehret, whom probably all of you know, because most of the speakers here, he recommended. He came up with some 10 different initiatives, water, energy, climate change, and some, of course, also political, like Ukraine and all that. So I think if he didn't send all those 10 subjects to you, I will follow up. So this will be like maybe every 2 weeks, people who are interested can join, and perhaps you can forward it to other people, friends who are interested. Maybe you will come up with some new ideas, new projects. Of course, Matt is great, but no, he cannot cover the whole thing. And maybe, in addition to those 10 subjects, you can come up with others. And of course, we need more speakers. So as I said, we are trying to build this kind of a grassroots movement under this, I think, very noble case of save the planet. Okay, so let's start with, as I said, let's start with people who have some specific technical ideas, projects. How we talk today, it's about water. Since you mentioned this first, it's Alexander. I mean, who
if it's possible.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Why don't you start with?
My first? Yes?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm, do you hear me?
Yes.
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 I'm Alexander Molokhov, Russian lawyer, the chairman of Administrative Council of the International Association Tavrida, Moscow, Brussels. In 2004, the Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko became a descent devote of Lagash, Shamarian king Lagash. It's because of him in 2014, the North Crimean Canal was blocked. In Soviet times, the canal connected the international cross-border Dnieper River with the peninsula. Now the Kiev radicals are threatening to lay down their life for prevention for the water supply. And at the same time, some members of Zelensky team come forward with such offers. Meanwhile, looking at the issue of Crimea's reunification with the Russian Federation, we should take into account human rights guaranteed to the population of the peninsula by the Declaration on the Right to Development, adopted the General Assembly in its resolution. It is important to stress that the declaration links the right to development with the right to self-determination and its integral part, which includes full sovereignty over natural resources. One of the most important principles of the declaration is creating an enabling environment for development that leads to the universal enjoyment of human it is known that after the Crimea's reunification with the Russian Federation, the illegal actions of the Ukrainian authorities led to humanitarian crisis in Crimea and to massive violation of human rights in this region. First of all, the so-called Crimean sanctions of USA, United Nations, and Ukraine deprive the population of the peninsula of access to electricity, water, and other natural resources, and restrict their freedom of movement. Ukrainian actions contradict the United Nations Charter and the World Declaration on Human Rights, the United Nations Declaration on Principles of International Law concerning friendly relations and cooperation among states in accordance with the United Nations Charter. Those on 3rd of March 2016, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner had insisted on investigating human rights violations during the blockade of Crimea. In September 2017, Mr. Idris Jaziri, special reporter on the negative impact on unilateral coercive measures at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva, also spoke about the negative impact of the Crimean sanctions on the lives of the peninsula residents. After a series of water supply cut-offs made by Kiev authorities, in June 2014, the water supply to Crimea via North Crimean Canal was stopped by a temporary dam. Before the Crimea's reunifications with the Russian Federation, Ukraine provided 85% on Crimea's water supply through the North Crimean Canal, running from the Dnieper. After the republic became part of Russia, water supplies in Crimea were cut off, and that had an extremely negative impact on development or agriculture. These actions on Ukrainian authorities are a direct violation of the right to access to drinking water and sanitation, as well as the right to food guaranteed by Universal Declaration on Human Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. During several sessions on the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, the Crimean representative of the International Council of Russian Compatriots asked the United Nations Special Rapporteur of the Right to Development, Saad Al-Farargi, in accordance with his mandate established several years ago, to draw attention to the current situation twice, but so far this request was not needed. Despite the fact that an international legal regime on the joint use and protection of water resources has a conflict potential. This is a trend towards the recognition of the rights to water and human rights in international law.
Okay, Alexander, thank you.
Thank you.
It's okay. But as we
if you pardon me.
Yeah, okay. We talked about technical things and then follow up with discussion. So please go ahead.
Okay.
Introduce yourself, please.
Yes, the reason I want to speak is because I think we should address the general method and thinking behind looking at the question of water on a global scale, but how it relates to us as humans, as societies, as economies. And then we can go down to the specific regions and areas where we might have so-called water issues.
Agree.
And if you allow me, I can start now.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Hussein Askari. I am the Southwest Asia coordinator for the International Schiller Institute. And I have been a student of the late American thinker and economist Lyndon LaRouche. And both he and I are great admirers of the great Ukrainian-Russian biogeochemist, Vladimir Vernadsky. In that sense, we have a bit of unconventional view of the matters of climate change, of raw materials and water and so on. But for example, on the question of climate change, because that comes up every time you discuss the water issue, we do believe that there is a climate change, a historic climate change. Climate changes the whole time, but we have big doubts on the new theory of the man-made climate change. As a friend of mine who's a geologist and hydrologist from France, an inventor, he says we have to learn how to work with climate change, not work against it. And there are many reasons for why I'm saying that, and we don't have the time to go through all the details, but the other thing which is related to that is that in our school, or the LaRouche school, the Vernadsky school, we don't really believe also in the issue of limited resources. This notion of limited resources does not apply to us humans, because human creativity, what Vernadsky calls the noetic sphere, the noosphere, the mind, is the source of all resources. For example, historically, we created bronze. There's nothing in nature which is as called bronze. We used our knowledge of chemistry to do that, to create it. Aluminum, for example, it didn't exist in the way we have it, although it is the most abundant substance on the crust of Earth, but it was useless for humans. The question of water, for example, which is our discussion, and water is not a limited resource, and it is inexhaustible. We cannot consume water. We use water because it goes into a cycle. It goes through plants, through our bodies, it goes out into the atmosphere and back to Earth and the oceans. Now, some of you might think I'm just saying self-evident things, which we learned as kids in school, the water cycle in nature. But believe me, if you go to any big international conference on water, and I have been to many of them, the only thing you hear is that water is a limited resource. We are getting out of reach for water. Water is disappearing all over the planet. And we are in a big crisis. There will be wars over water, and so on and so forth. So I stopped going to conferences in Europe, and I started going to conferences on water in Africa and in Asia, because there they have a view of how to solve things in a real way. So the question of scarcity of water, in general, we define two sorts of scarcity. One is physical and one is economic. Physical means it rains too little, like in desert areas. Economic scarcity is because you have areas where it rains a lot, like the sub-Saharan Africa, the tropical regions, but people cannot even drink that water because you don't have the infrastructure to clean the water and drink it, because it can kill you. You cannot use it for agriculture because we don't have the infrastructure for irrigation systems. So in that sense, it's not scarce physically, but it's scarce because of the economic backwardness of the infrastructure. Now, so generally what the question of climate change, water, but also human activity is intertwined. We look like Vernadsky does, that life, for example, is a factor in the geological world. He divided the universe we live in into these three levels: the non-living, the material world, or the chemical world, and then we have life, which dominates and transforms the non-living world. But then we have the human mind, the noetic sphere, the noosphere, which dominates the latter two, and transform it. But we also, as humans, we can contribute to spreading life as a principle to larger areas in the world. And that's where maybe we can even bring it into the solar system. That's what many nations are planning. We plan to go to the moon, to Mars, and other planets, and colonize them and start planting things. We need water to do that. So in that sense, we have to look at these things from this Vernadskian scientific, or LaRouche-Vernadsky scientific view of man, nature, life, and so on and so forth. So by putting human creativity in the center of looking at the problem, but also solving the problem. In that, I wonder if I can just show a few slides.
Sure.
To illustrate some of the, if you can enable me, because I'm disabled now, to share my screen.
Artyom, please.
Now you can share. Yeah, it's clear.
I'm trying. Yeah, now. Okay. Yeah, this is the cover of the book I wrote with my colleague Jason Ross on extending the new Silk Road to West Asia and Africa, because one of the major issues we are working on at the Schiller Institute for many, many years is to build the Eurasian African land bridge and extending it to North Africa. So, the whole idea of the Belt and Road, the cooperation between China, Russia, India, and then with Europe, with West Asia, with Africa, this is going to be very important for avoiding war. We can extend that into the Americas and build bridges like through the Bering Strait to America, South America, and have a new set of relations among nations based on economic cooperation. Now, if you look at this map of the new Silk Road and then you compare it to the deserts, this is where the Silk Road mostly is concentrated. This is an exaggerated picture of the deserts. These are big deserts, dry areas, and semi-arid areas. You have the Sahara in Africa, the Arabian Sahara, the Iranian Dasht-e-Kabir desert. We have the Gobi desert in China, and so on and so forth. We even have dry areas in West United States. Now, life is not happy about this situation. There was life in these regions during the Ice Age, like in the African Sahara. These were lush gardens with animals everywhere, with the lakes, freshwater lakes, and so on. So nature has its own cycle, and then life can be defeated or can win based on the condition created by nature. But humans can do a different thing. Now, this is the Lake Chad. I think my friend Lawrence Freeman will discuss this. We have the Lake Chad crisis, which is drying. It has its reasons. I think this is the Transaqua, but I will leave it for Larry Freeman to discuss it. The impact of humans is not, as kids are being taught in school, that we destroy life, we cut trees, that's the image you get today in the media and even in schools, that humans are a destructive force. Now, if a NASA study have discovered that in the past 2 decades, China and India, but mostly China, have increased the vegetation on planet Earth by 20%, all the green areas, by planting trees, by increasing the area with agriculture. So we humans can do a service to life and to nature by expanding our economic noetic activity into areas where life is almost impossible today. Now, in my work, as not only as an analyst and an activist, I started working on, I'm fascinated, I'm from Iran, by the idea of stopping desertification, but also agriculture in dry areas. And in that sense, I started a company. It's called Swede Hydro. Swedish hydro is for water, because I wanted to work with geologists, hydrologists, and agriculture experts to to find ways of working with governments to bring life to desert areas and protect like this Iraqi green belt to go to Iraq. This company, they are part of this Chinese effort to green. And we even visited Iraq. We met with the Iraqi irrigation minister, with the agriculture.
I think we lost.
It was just getting exciting.
No, anyway, so hello?
Yeah, okay, you're back.
Yeah, we just lost you for about 20 seconds.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, maybe I should share again. Are my slides? I think I don't need to show more slides. I just wanted to make the point that we actually have the ability as humans.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
China work together not only for their mutual benefit, but working in areas like in Africa, West Asia, Middle East, so-called, in many parts of the world where we can. Yeah. So I think I stop here.
Okay. Lawrence, I think your name already was mentioned several times, so it's your turn.
Okay, do you want to have your tech person give me the host so I can use it?
Artyom, please do that.
Yes. I'm going to use expanded slides that I presented to the United Nations at a two-day conference on TransAqua last August. But I'd like to say a few things introductory, which is the idea of water shortage, as Hussein pointed out, is completely inappropriate. There are many ways of getting water, and there's existing water that if moved to another location can change the whole geography, the whole economic transformation of that area. So in Africa, which is where I've been working for many decades and still do, just got back from Africa a couple of weeks ago, there is a lot of water in Africa. The question is man engineering the movement of water to get it to a place where it can be productive. And of course, Africa, the water is a major issue. And we see a discussion going on now between Ethiopia and Egypt around the Nile. And the area that we're going to look at today a little bit is the question of Lake Chad. Chad, the lake, is in what's called the Sahel, which is the thin desert, which is the introduction into the largest, I believe, largest desert in the world, which is the Sahara, which is about the size of the continental United States. And as was pointed out, this desert, which is the largest, driest desert, wasn't always that way. In fact, it was only created about 3 million years ago when the African plate crashed into the European plate, and then has been moving back since then and will move forward again. But it's also affected by a approximately 22,000 year cycle, which is based on the wobble of the Earth. The axis wobbles. And therefore, what we're seeing now as a desert is only come about maybe about 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. And according to the cycle, 15,000 years from now, there'll be water again in the Sahara. So the question is, but we shouldn't have to wait for 15,000 years to have water. And we don't have to. And what the idea of TransAqua is to bring water to the Sahel. And this is an idea that's about 40 years old. Now, if you look at the Sahel today, for those of you who may follow the news, it's very, very bad conditions. Many of the countries in the Sahel are struggling to survive, struggling against violent extremists who occupy those areas of the desert which are desolate. And even the areas in Central Africa are suffering. And the idea of TransAqua was to bring about not only development in the Sahel, but create an actual mega project of development that would involve maybe upwards of 12 different African nations to create a complete economic transformation in Africa. And this idea, which has been around for about 40 years, is still alive. In fact, there was just a conference in Italy last week on the subject. And some of us on this program and others have been fighting to keep this idea alive. And it does have still some life to it. And it's something that is absolutely necessary, because in the Lake Chad Basin, you have maybe up to 50 million Africans, majority Nigerians, who are living in horrible conditions. And this doesn't have to be this way. In fact, it could have been changed already. China now is involved in this project, along with Italy. Those are the two main forces, along with the coordinating body, the Lake Chad Basin Commission, which I've worked with in the past as a scientific advisor. And my idea would be to get China, Russia, and the United States collaborating on this project, and we could solve much of the problems in Africa today if we had three great industrial economic powers working together. And that's something that we should try to bring about. So I'm going to run through quickly some of the information on the Chad Basin, and we can bring this up for discussion at a later point. This is one picture of the lake shrinking from 1963 to 2001. Now there's another picture which takes up to 2007. You can see that there are two pools of water in Lake Chad around 1963, about 25,000 square kilometers. And then in 2007, you can see it's a tiny pool. Here's another picture. If you look in the bottom right-hand corner, that's 2013. And this is the most recent one I have of 2017, where there's just one pool, one body of water in the southern pool. There's two pools in Lake Chad. And estimates are between 15 and 20,000 square kilometers. If you think I'm exaggerating, here's a picture I traveled on the lake in 2014. I'm probably one of the few, maybe only American who's been there since Boko Haram activity started. And you can see the fishermen are standing in the water, ankle deep as we went around the lake. This is a picture of what we want to happen, where the two pools of water are completely filled. And we go back to 25,000 square kilometers of water. This is a picture of the Lake Chad in its large basin, the hydraulic basin, which covers, you can see, goes into several countries: Algeria, Nigeria, Niger, Chad, parts of Sudan. It's very large, and it's a very large section of Africa that crosses over from below the Sahel, through the Sahel, into the Sahara. This is the basic idea of Lake Chad, the Transaqua project. But the Lake Chad catchment area, the one we're showing, is over 2 million square kilometers, and gives you the countries that are involved in the area. The main rivers that flow into it are from the Central African Republic, the Chari and the Lagon. Here you have a breakdown of the area of each of those states, how much of the portion of it is in the basin. And you can see the largest portion is Chad, and Niger is number 2, and the Cars number 3. Here's a picture now that shows you the hydraulic basin of over 2.5 million square kilometers broken up by the various countries. So this is the idea of Chad, of the Transaqua, is the yellow portion is to build a canal using water from the tributaries to the Congo River across to Central Africa, the red dot there, and then that would feed into the Chari River, which would then flow up to the blue spot you see. That is Lake Chad. This is an idea. It's an engineering idea. You might call it a hypothesis that has never been fully tested. And that's what we're fighting to do. We would use about 5 to 8% of the water of the Congo River. Here's another picture crossing over the watershed between the Congo and the Central African Republic into Chad. The recent estimates are that the Congo River, the volume of the Congo River is about 42,000 cubic meters of water per second. So that comes out to probably be about 1.2 trillion per year of cubic meter water. we're proposing, the idea is to take 5 to 8% of that, which is a very small portion. And despite various outlets in France in particular, and the Congo, the DRC, they are attacking this idea as stealing water. And we're not stealing water, we're using water because the water keeps flowing. So no water is being taken from the Congo, it's being used for the development of the Congo and 12 nations. Many of us, including myself, have been attacked for advocating this proposal of building a 2,400 kilometer canal into the Central African Republic. And the Central African Republic, which has been going through a very difficult time, would benefit from this enormously. And all the countries involved would benefit enormously from increased electricity, irrigation, agricultural expansion, trade, navigation, manufacturing. All of this is possible. We would essentially create a super economic zone of a large portion, maybe a third of the African continent could be involved in this development project. This is what is being proposed is a series of dams. These dots are dams, and they have to be studied. There's been no feasibility study of Transaqua. That's what we're working towards. That's what we need to happen. But this is what the idea of Dr. Vicky and Andrea Magnano have had when they presented this proposal 40 years ago. Now you can see, and if you look in the upper right-hand corner, that yellow circle shows you the direction of the Transaqua intersecting the East-West Railroad, which has to be built, and intersecting the roads that are being run from East Africa all the way across to Dakar. Here's another picture of it, if you look. So the idea is that Transaqua wouldn't exist alone, but it'd be part of a massive development for the whole continent of Africa, intersecting the north-south road, which you see in the red line on the right, going through Mombasa, intersecting the Silk Road, which has begun with the railroad system from Mombasa to Nairobi, first railroad they've had there since the British colonial powers, and then going across as the roads move across West Africa. So this would be part of a huge transformation of the entire continent of Africa, where instead of having 500 to 600 million people living in poverty, we would eliminate poverty. We would bring 600 million people who don't have electricity and would give them electricity. Africa would become a net exporting food continent, not buying food, which it still does. All of this is possible by man's intervention into nature to change it and improve it. So we organized, this is the International Conference to Save Lake Chad, which took place in Abuja, Nigeria, and February 26 to 28 of 2018. I helped initiate the ideas behind the conference. This is the leaders in the middle, you can see Bahari, you have the president of Chad, you have the president of Niger. At the end, you have the then Executive Secretary of Lake Chad Basin Commission, who I'd worked with. This is a picture on the left, is the current head of the Lake Chad Basin Commission, Mama Nuhu, President Bahari, who I've discussed this proposal with several times personally, and Sanusi Abdullahi, who was the former Executive Secretary of the Lake Chad Basin Commission. Now, this is what at the Abuja Declaration, if you look at number 7, coming out of this 3-day conference, which had thousands of people, the heads of states of all of the region. And it says that the African Union endorses the interbasin water transfer, taking water from the Congo River basin, not the Congo River, but the basin, and moving it north to a dry basin. So mankind is taking a moist area, moving some water from that moist area into a very arid area. And that is something we can do. We've done it before in the United States, China has done it. And then you look at point 9, the African Development Bank facilitate the creation of a Lake Chad fund of $50 billion. This is the roadmap, and you can see in the first paragraph that Transaqua project, which would take water from the right tributary of the River Congo, et cetera, to the Chari River, is the preferred feasible option. So this conference adopted Transaqua as the preferred option. And since that conference, there's been a lot of foot dragging. This is a picture of myself. I spoke several times at the conference motivating this project. And here we have the representative from the Italian government and Mama Nuhu, of the executive director of the LCBC, the Italian government at the conference. And this is, this picture is from October. They pledged 1.5 million euro for a feasibility study just to test the hypothesis of Transaqua. Does the idea work? And the China Power also spoke at the conference, and they have made a commitment, although no hard money has come forward yet. Approximately $5 million, a mere $5 million is needed for a feasibility study to test something that could change life in Africa. And we're still fighting to get that. But this is a memorandum of understanding between Italy and the Lake Chad Basin Commission. And this gives you a summary of what we are at this point, and I can answer any further questions that we bring up in this discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Lawrence. Anyone else who has some technical ideas before we go into discussion, more broad discussion? Anyone has specific technical projects like what Lawrence mentioned?
I have something I could offer.
Okay, Matt.
Will I be able to also share my screen? I think Lawrence has to stop his screen share.
Okay,
Yeah, Mr. Lawrence, please stop the screen share.
I'm trying.
Screen demonstration, switch off the demonstration.
Exit.
Usually it's at the top of the screen. I see it is where it says stop share.
Right. I see share screen at the bottom, and I'm trying to stop it. You cannot. Okay.
Yes.
Got
Okay.
it. Thank you.
Okay, Matt, go ahead.
You're welcome.
Okay, let me just pull up my PowerPoint here ever so briefly. 1 second. It's not actually giving me my.
Artyom, allow.
Oh, there we are. I've got it. Okay. Okay. Yes, Ed, thank you for pulling this this course together, and thank you for also asking me to say a few words as well on one aspect of this multifaceted crisis that humanity faces. I manage a geopolitical journal in Canada since 2012 called the Canadian Patriot Review. I myself am not an engineer or a water specialist, just to get a disclosure, but as a citizen of the world and as somebody who cares very deeply about the future and where we're going, I have been very attracted to this question of solving the water crisis. And I've worked very hard with a variety of people over the years to popularize and educate people around the different options that are available to both understand and then to solve the crisis facing our continent and also more broadly. Currently, what we see here on the slide is a picture of the dryness of the United States, the continent, Mexico, and some of Canada. The heat, temperature at ground level. So obviously we've got a multifaceted crisis, like I've said. We have droughts. They say that currently about 40% of California is in a bad drought, 70% is in a regular form of drought. We have desertification, which has been increasing incrementally across the especially Southwest United States, where current estimates from the United Nations warn that 40% of the U.S. Surface area is at risk, or the Southwest is at risk of desertification. 30% is arid or extremely arid. And we have other issues too. We have all seen images throughout the summertime of fires throughout California and beyond, all the way up to Vancouver. Throughout the summertime, you couldn't go outside for more than an hour. Everything was yellow because the saturation of just the effects of the fires were that bad throughout the summertime. This has been devastating on the food production. I mean, we already have seen a complete collapse for a variety of reasons of farming income from 2012, where it was $123 billion of farm income, has fallen down to $67 billion in 2019, which was even before COVID. Farm bankruptcies across the United States have spiked to a 12-year high, like I said, and this is in spite of subsidies being offered to keep things alive. And food is being dumped because of the supply chains over the last 8-9 months in COVID, restaurants shutting down, have caused a mass disruption. So farmers, in spite of the fact that there's mass starvation in the world, thousands of people die every day of food scarcity and food and starvation. In spite of that fact, they're dumping thousands of tons of vegetables, dumping milk and other products because of the supply chain breakdown. So there's big problems on a variety of levels. So I want to go through one aspect of it. The question here, and also the UN has just warned that we're facing the worst food crisis in over 50 years. And that's a conservative estimate. So what are the solutions? Obviously, there's underwater aquifers. What I have here is a picture of the Ogallala aquifer, in which supplies this basin for the Great Plains. It's a huge zone of agricultural productivity. But as you see from the bottom image, there's been a 9 feet decline just in the last several years, between 2011 and 2015. Overall, in the last 17 years, this is only till 2017, it's declined 19 feet. So there's a huge depletion of aquifers. This is just the biggest one. So that's an option which is drying down. We have other options like obviously there's flood controls and there's different reservoirs that are available, but a lot of the reservoirs are also mismanaged. They've been neglected for a long time. What we're looking at there is an example of Folsom Lake is one major reservoir in the Southwest, which on the right hand is a picture of it in 2015. It's since replenished a little bit, but these are massive problems. We also have other, the Shasta Lake Reservoir at 42% of its capacity. Oroville, another major reservoir, is at 36%. There's not really a lot of creative solutions. So when people introduce, when you hear a lot of the types of solutions that are acceptable in polite society, what you tend to have are piecemeal forms of like, let's maybe divert a little bit from this one zone into this other zone. That's still very zero sum because you're still taking from somewhere, which is, there's not a lot of abundance, period, in the West Coast of the United States. So by taking from somewhere to bring it somewhere where it's even more needed, you're just creating more tension, more scarcity, and these piecemeal things are very limited. You can only take this so far, and we've been doing that now for 40, 50 years. The other option, which is a little bit more cynical even, is also zero sum, and this is of the view, well, where even the former governor of California, Jerry Brown, has said, and many are saying that the problem was we shouldn't have populated the west coast of the continent to begin with. That was the mistake, and that it's actually nature telling us now that we have to get rid of our hubris, get rid of the idea that we could build the Imperial Valley of California, which became very quickly after the New Deal, it became one of the primary vegetable growing regions of the world. That was all artificial. That was built based on man deluding himself into thinking we could affect nature, but in reality, we have to adapt to deserts and depopulate. That's another solution being presented. Sure, yeah, you could adapt to deserts, or I think you could take a non-zero sum, much healthier mentality, and this has been brought up several times in the course of today's discussion so far. Looking over on the other side of the world where we have the Belt and Road Initiative, we have the multipolar alliance involving 135 nations. Russia and China are leading this alternative model of finance, of economic behavior, of value, where things are not zero sum, but rather win-win. And the systems being addressed and the investment practices are not speculative as they are so dominant in the West under Wall Street and other things that have been contaminating our way of doing economics for a very long time. If you do investment in China, you're going to be investing in real measurable productivity, things that bear fruit and also benefit the people as well as investors. So what we have here is I just took a quick picture of the Move Southwater North project, which is moving ahead very fast. There's 3 routes to this, and China, along with all of the rail, the high speed and other things that they're building, there's a big problem where China has a lack, just like in North America, there's a lack of water availability in the north, but the north is also where you have the greatest population densities and the greatest industry, but the water is 8% of what's available in China. So there's a lot of water in the south where there isn't very much population, but there's a lot of flooding. There's been, over the last century, millions and millions of people who have died of floods in the southern parts of China, off the Yangtze, Three Gorges Dam zones. And the other problem of famine has always struck the north. So this has been really dealt with starting in 2001 with a three-phase project. Two of those three routes are already built now, of the eastern upgrade, the eastern route, the central route, and the western route. So the eastern and central are already done. It's a $62 billion project. It's moving 44.8 billion cubic meters of water overall from the south. Through tunnels, canals, 1,000 kilometers of each route, east and central, feeding into Tianjin and Beijing, has already, like I said, been built. One was finished in 2013, the other in 2017. And then the western route should only be finished. It's still in the planning phases, which will go through the Tibetan plateaus. And that will only be finished, they say, at around 2050 or so. But this is big, and they're not looking at it piecemeal. This is a holistic approach to water, which is very different from the sorts of things that we're being fed in the West. So now, this is really a revival. What China is doing is not something foreign to the West. It's not something that we should see as alien in any way, because when we look at the way that we built up under Franklin Roosevelt, under the New Deal, under John F. Kennedy, and even under Eisenhower before that, when we were building these big, large-scale projects a long time ago that we stopped doing about 45, 50 years ago, there was a different paradigm, which we now see being revived with China and with Russia and other nations collaborating in that multipolar alliance. We're just a couple of days away from the anniversary of John F. Kennedy's assassination, which I think was a major breaking point that moved society into a very artificial, unnatural mode of behavior that's at the heart of a lot of our problems, if you really get down to it. So I thought that it would be very appropriate to just cite a couple of speeches from John F. Kennedy himself in 1962, when he was touring the west coast of the United States and inaugurating a lot of dams that were being built, and really advocating this very continental approach to water management and thinking very long-term about the next several generations, because this was not what we're facing now in North America as a water crisis is not something we should have been surprised by. This was already being discussed in John F. Kennedy's time and before that. So JFK, just one speech that he gave at the dedication of the Oahe Dam in South Dakota, he said, the question which confronts us is the whole question of our resource development in the Western United States in the 1960s. Surely a continent so rich in minerals, so blessed with water, and a society so replete with engineers and scientists can make and must make the best possible use for the bounty which nature and God have given us. 5 days later, he speaks at Pueblo, Colorado, at the dedication of a trans-mountain tunnel system connecting the Atlantic and Pacific watersheds for the first time, where he says, and these speeches are just beautiful, but this is a segment where he says, this is an investment in the future of this country, an investment that will repay large dividends. It is an investment in the growth of the West, in the new cities and industries which this project helps make possible. And I hope that in the 1960s, we will commit ourselves to this same kind of mutual effort and not regard those projects which aid our cities as inimical to Colorado, or those projects which help our farmers as taking it away from our cities. Because that concept of the moving ahead of a great country on a great errand is what I think can give this country its leadership in the future as it has in the past. So this is a very different sort of thing than what we've seen coming out of presidents after John F. Kennedy. But this is obviously a vision which we didn't, the baton wasn't taken up, so to speak, of this spirit and this mode of committing policy to practice after John F. Kennedy fell. This is a slightly low-res version of a map that was produced and made available in a short 15-minute motion picture by the Parsons Company in 1964. This idea had been already circulated for several years before that, called the North American Water and Power Alliance. One of the big things, just like China, we have in the north, in the first picture, there was a lot of blue in Canada, a lot of yellow and red in lifeless zones in the Western United States. Obviously, what we have is a discrepancy where there's a lot of water in the north. There's about 2,200 million acre feet per year of rainfall and about 1,300 million acre feet per year of runoff into the Atlantic, into the Pacific Ocean and into the Arctic Ocean. And this is water that is just not at all even utilized by biotic activity. There's not a lot of biosphere in the tundra region anyway, especially in Alaska, Yukon, and North BC. So there's a lot of wasted water runoff. This is a project that was circulated. John F. Kennedy was working before he died with a lot of the key people who were promoting this. It became legislation in the 1960s too that had the support of Robert F. Kennedy, as well as many others from both sides of the political aisle, to basically take about 10 to 20% of that excess water runoff to capture it from Alaska before it goes back into the oceans, into the salt water, and capture that fresh water in the form of dams. We had, in the planning stages, we had 95 dams, pumping stations, because it would have to be pumped at various points, about 9 strategic points, very high above sea level. And then using the natural flow of gravity, it would be brought down into the continent into 2 circuits that would, one, replenish the Great Lakes, basically what you see there going through Canada, and along the way create a massive amount of water for irrigation, 19 million acre feet per year of water for irrigation for the Canadian provinces. Flood controls, right now we have a lot of floods in Alberta that would be managed going from Peace River. And also the Great Lakes are completely polluted. They're also lowering. This would be replenishing them, cleaning them out, and providing potentially barge canals as well that would open up and would complement rail development and other things, since the Canadian zone is completely underdeveloped. I mean, the only population zones are really strung up in several cities along the U.S. border. There's a lot of potential, but not a lot of development. The other branch would go down as we see. I've actually circulated, I've got an image which is a little bit more up to date and I think beautiful, that was produced by the LaRouche organization some years ago. And I've been circulating this on the Canadian Patriot website for many years, of an up-to-date version, just showcasing the major projects. And like I said, it involves collection agencies in the north, and then using pumps, a lot of tunneling. When you start getting down into the United States, you need tunneling because the water will evaporate. So a lot of this would be underground, just like in China, big circuits. And these are huge tunnels. As you get into the distribution zones, this is one example. The Rocky, a lot of the point that the Parsons Company makes in this project is that the canals, a lot of them have already been built by virtue of the topography of the continent, and the Rocky Mountain Trench being a major one would provide a 500 mile long massive reservoir of the water that would contain approximately 650 million acre feet. It would just build up over the course of several years, and every year that would then, within 5 or 6 years when it's full, you could then distribute about 100 million acre feet per year into the south, and produce a lot of power along the way. There'd be something like the pumping stations themselves take a lot of power, but the whole thing would produce about 180 gigawatts of power. About 90 gigawatts would be required for pumping stations, so that would supply its own needs, and then the excess would be used for other industrial growth activity and everything else. This is all based on the presumption that the West is able to get its head out of its butt and actually stop this unipolar consumer society fiction that's causing us to go into a collapse, and instead work with the multipolar alliance of China and the other nations who want industrial growth, who want big projects, and don't want to think in zero-sum games. So this is all presuming that we can actually refocus our ideas on our real self-interest. So this is one aspect of it. I'll just show 2 more pictures from the old 1964 feature that people can watch on YouTube. This is one aspect of it that goes through the Idaho, Oregon, Utah, Nevada, California, Arizona in distribution zones, and also more reservoirs that would then double food production along the way. I mean, literally, you would be doubling the farmland from 21 million acres to 44.3 million acres. It would take about, anywhere between 15 to 30 years, depending on the amount of intention and support politically is put behind this. That's about the estimated time that modern engineers have estimated that this would require to be built. You'd have about 4,500 miles of canals. You'd have 95, like I said, dams, but as I said, China is creating a precedent for this that I think is forcing people to reevaluate these sorts of things that we were told couldn't happen. This would go all the way down into North Mexico along the way, and you could be able to even, as part of the circuit, replenish the Ogallala aquifer and other aquifers along the way that have dried down. This would create massive greening forest zones. It would redefine what we mean by conservation. And just one last image, because I am Canadian, just to focus a little bit quickly on the cleaning up of the Great Lakes. This would also involve different, according to the original designs that have been updated, and I think there's certain questions that still have to be answered in details, but you'd be able to also open up the door to connections, canals to Hudson Bay, James Bay, as we see there on the left and on the right, to the Great Lakes, to Manitoba Lake and Lake Michigan. That have all sorts of nonlinear benefits as well. There's huge, as I said, minerals, resources, and other things, which, Donald Trump, we don't know what the situation is going to be come January, but there's a huge fight in the United States. And we know that Donald Trump has not only called for the revival of U.S. manufacturing. Originally under the U.S.-China trade agreements, there was supposed to be China is a primary purchaser of the U.S. manufacturing products, but also President Trump has endorsed the Canada to Alaska rail connection, which both falls into alignment very, very synergistically with the Bering Strait development, the Polar Silk Road, which is again moving in through the Arctic as we speak, that could bring North America into harmony with Russia, with Asia and other nations wanting to build rail and really develop their continents. So I would just say, ending with one last statement by JFK before I stop. JFK, he was already sort of, I think, prescient and noticing that there was the rise of a certain cynical view of large-scale development, even in his time. It's gotten much more acute today. What I've said is almost, in the course of this discussion, what I've said, what Larry has said, what Hussein Askari has said, is considered somewhat heretical by some, including many experts, looking at these problems, because your mind is not allowed to go this way anymore. We're told the only thing we're allowed to do is adapt to scarcity, adapt to the deserts. And JFK was sort of as I said, intervening on that before it became a dominant philosophy, where he said, there are 2 points on conservation that have come home to me in the last 2 days. This is at the end of his West Coast tour in 1962. One is the necessity for us to protect what we already have, what nature gave to us, and use it well, not to waste water or land, to set aside land and water, recreation, wilderness, and all the rest now, so that it will be available to those who come in the future. So that is the traditional concept of conservation, and it still has a major part in the national life of the United States. But the other part of conservation is the newer part, and that is to use science and technology to achieve significant breakthroughs, as we are doing today, and in that way to conserve the resources which 10 or 20 or 30 years ago may have been wholly unknown.
Okay, Matt, well, very inspiring. Did anyone estimate the numbers of dollars necessary to use to build the thing?
Yeah, this is a, in 1964 dollars, it was about 100 billion. Today, we're probably looking at a couple of, maybe $1 trillion or so investment with inflation. However, what I always tell people is, who get scared by that number is, well, look at how much we spent bombing people in the Middle East and Iraq and in Afghanistan. What is it, 8-9 trillion? Was that more payback for you? Are you happier with that?
It's exactly what I wanted to compare the numbers. And okay, I think we started with Crimea, and let's probably go back, and we have Alina Lip. She's now in Germany. And I believe that Alina wants to say something about that.
Yeah. Hello, good evening, everybody. I can shortly introduce myself, maybe, so you know who I am. Yeah, my name is Alina Lip. I'm 27 years old. I live in Germany, and I have a master's degree in sustainability sciences. My father moved to Crimea 3 years ago. And I had the idea to write my diploma in Crimea about ecological problems, and they have a lot. And at some point I found my topic, and this is water. So now I work at a company, it's called Art Aqua. It's a German-Russian company that cleans water all over the world, especially also for the Fukushima nuclear power plant, for example, because it's the only company that can clean radioactivity, filter it out of water, because they have special filters. And so my idea, I have to add, this company is not only cleaning radioactivity, but also they are doing, I lost a word. One second. They also build desalination plants. And since there are a lot of water problems in Crimea, it's now my plan to get this company to Crimea, and I studied this water problems there a lot in the last month, and talked a lot with my father, and I can tell you that the problem is really, really bad. Because first, I will give you a short overview. I have no PowerPoint presentation because it was very spontaneous, so I'm sorry. The main problem is, of course, that the North Crimean water channel was blocked in 2014 by Ukraine, and this the people in Crimea, they got 85% of their water out of this channel. So now there's no water anymore from this channel, and everything is practically drying out. Especially the northern part of the peninsula, it already was the driest place in Crimea, but now there's deserts, and especially farmers lost their land. The land is also now over-salted because the water from the Black Sea was going inside of the land. And so this land is practically useless for the future also. And of course, already in the years before the Ukraine blocked this channel, there were problems because of climate change. Especially in the last years, you can see that there's less rain than it was before. There are, especially in the summer, long periods without rain, and in the winter, there's not really snow anymore, so the water reservoirs are not filling up anymore. They are drying out. The groundwater level is sinking, so the people have to dig deeper for their water wells. My father told me that there are some wells who are 400 meters in the ground now. And the people are so desperate that they dig deeper and deeper, and they, of course, don't control the chemical composition. So the water has not really good quality maybe, and they get health issues. The daily life looks like that especially in the big cities, in Simferopol and Sevastopol, you have water from the tap only twice a day. And if this is not enough, for example, my father, he has a garden, and he needed to buy water from companies who deliver water to your home, and this is like 10 times more expensive than water from the tap. So he paid about €5 per cubic meter, and from the tap it's 15 cents. So very expensive, and people who live in Crimea usually don't really have that money. So it really is a big problem. Yeah, the government is talking about solutions already for several years, and I would say that nothing really happened. Of course, they built some pipelines across the peninsula from some lakes and from places where there's a little bit of water, but it's also, for example, it's not a real solution to build a huge pipeline from the mainland, from Russia, because already there in the region of Krasnodar, there's also they also have problems with drought. So yeah, but a few weeks ago, or a few months already, scientists from Crimean University found underground water and underground rivers, and they are thinking about using this. But critics, of course, say, well, if you use it too much, then too intense, then there will maybe salt water from the sea will go inside, and this wouldn't be very great. Yeah, and a new idea is to build a river dam somewhere, but this is of course very expensive and not really ecologic. So in my opinion, there's the only option left would be desalination. And this is what I'm working on right now, to build some connections. Yeah.
Okay,
That's
Alina,
it.
it's strange that this desalination, it's an old technology. I think Israel uses it, and so why I think it was your government was supposed to think about it in advance. It's already, they cut off the channel in 2014, so it's already 6 years. For 6 years, you could probably, maybe ask Israel or some other companies to help. Did you approach Israel with the technology?
No. And
No.
I don't know why the Russian government wasn't acting in the last years. Well, of course, I know they act. They are discussing a lot and do some conferences, but I don't know. But especially my company, this Art Aqua, they have a second company in Russia. So the Russians know that this technology exists, and this is Russian expertise, Russian technology, and
maybe
Russian
we can ask. Okay, maybe we can ask people on this panel. I see that Robert, he has. They are now back in the States, and Robert Zapisachny, he has the U.S. Ecological Association, and I think he has some ideas how to help Crimeans and maybe other countries.
Right.
Robert, go
so,
ahead.
well, thank you, Edward. So there are actually a few Israeli companies. I'm sorry I came late to the panel. I was talking actually to one of my friends at AIPAC, which is the primary U.S.-Israel lobbying organization in the country. And I think they would be very interested in any project that helps with Russia, because obviously Russia is a member of the Security Council. They've always wanted a much better relationship with Russia anyway. So whether it's Crimea or other countries. Now, the question is, which companies should Russians approach Israel? Because some are better than others. So when it comes to desalination, IDE is probably the leading company when it comes to desalination plants. Israel has 5 main desalination plants which produce the majority of its water. There's no reason that they produce desalination through what was called reverse osmosis. I think that there could be I think they would be open to the idea of reverse osmosis projects. But considering that the infrastructure of Crimea has been, and because this is still potentially a real war zone, I think another idea is water generation projects through atmospheric generation, that is getting water from the air. There's a company called WaterGen. It was actually started by a Soviet-born, I believe he's from Georgia. He's a billionaire actually now in Israel. And he started this idea of creating water from the air. So I think there are a lot of, not just in Crimea, but in other parts of Russia, where we could work with, where Russia could work with water to install atmospheric water generation to generate water from the air. So WaterGen for the water from the air, IDE for reverse osmosis plants. Another company that I hope Russia could propose a partnership with is Netafim. Netafim is a fascinating company that deals with drip irrigation technology. So the idea is Israel, unlike Russia, because it was in a desert, they always had to think about what is the level, what is the absolute minimum amount of water necessary to produce your food. Hence the concept drip irrigation technology. That is from to the very drip, what is the minimum amount necessary? So Netafim does the idea of actually drip, and it's worked, they've done it in many developing countries, and certainly Russia. Russia obviously is a very developed country, but because they've always had a surplus of water, for example, Lake Baikal, I believe, is 20% of the world's fresh water. So they definitely have, Russia has always had a mentality of abundance, that they are, and for good reason, they're a country with a great number of resources. We need to help them adopt a more scarcity approach to make every drip of water count, particularly in their agriculture, as well as not just in their agriculture concepts, but I also believe just in terms of trying to make every amount of fresh water count. So I think those three companies alone should be approached. We could think of other companies, but those are really the three main ones in Israel that are worth interesting about. I could think of a couple of others, but those are the three that are the most important by far.
I would like to add something.
Yeah, go ahead.
May I? Okay.
Sure.
I didn't say that this company I work for, well, my boss was saying this. He says this is the most modern technology that exists on the whole world, because after the process of desalination, there's no brine left. So, for example, in Mexico, we have the problem that they have a big algae carpet now, which is from Mexico until Africa. So it's really huge. They have a massive problem there, and they have to clean up the beach every morning. So this company got a job now for 10 years with the GIZ to work there because it's the only company where after the process there's no brine left, because the brine, all other companies, they after the process they have salt brine, right? And this brine usually is being thrown back in the sea. So so the salt level in Mexico, for example, was rising over years, and
right.
this is leading to this problem with the algae.
Yeah, I mean, I think the much bigger problem is, and we've seen this, for example, there are two problems usually developing countries have. One is obviously what you referred to earlier about the idea of overpumping the aquifer. That is, if you pump too much water from the ground, the barrier between salt water and fresh water cracks. Yes. And the entire area. So that's part of the problem.
Yes.
And the other real problem I could definitely see, and this has not been discussed so far, and it doesn't really deal with the algae issue, but I think the much bigger problem is leaking pipes. Even in developed cities like Chicago and London, something like 30% of water usually is wasted in a given year. That's why in developing cities, it could be as high as 50 or 60%. So I don't know where Crimea is listed in, or Sevastopol or Yalta, but it would be fascinating to know. I mean, there are companies that just deal with the idea of fixing infrastructure of pipes to make sure that leaking is not done. Also, we should rethink about, I don't know if we can design new sinks, but the idea is sometimes when you open the sink, sometimes there is technology where people will automatically shut it off so that people don't forget about it. Or even when they're brushing their teeth, the concept of people leaving the water on, even those ideas, people need to start thinking about automatically shutting off sinks. That could be a huge issue. That could be a big difference in terms of helping Crimea with its water problems.
Okay.
One thing that
So now, Lawrence, you want to say something?
well, on the question of desalination, I mean, this has been known for a long period of time. I think one additional factor we can bring into it is nuclear power desalination. Not only would you get nuclear energy for developing sector countries, but you would also use a tremendous heat source from nuclear power to carry out the desalination and removal of salt. I mean, for example, if you look at the Nile River, aside from the dispute right now between Egypt and Ethiopia, the Nile River is simply not powerful enough to service the 10 countries that are in the basin. It's the longest river in the world, but it's not the biggest. And therefore, what we'd have to do is actually create the equivalent of another Nile River by nuclear desalination in the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. This could also, of course, would impact the Middle East. I think we ought to think about new technologies. There is desalination going on in, I believe, Port Sudan. There is desalination going on in some of the Arab countries, but not on the scale necessary to actually make a difference of the equivalent of creating another river. And again, I think this brings up the question of thinking big, not thinking with the confines of conserving. How do we conserve what we have? But how do we actually expand and create something new that we don't have that advances the course of human life and civilization?
Thanks, Lawrence. We have now a guy who actually worked for the government and State Department, and also was in the Senate. So it's back to Washington. Give us some political stuff, Jim.
I'll be very brief because I have to confess honestly, almost all of this is way above my head. I'm not a technical person. I can understand that a lot of people here have done a lot of great work and have a great depth of understanding of what are obviously very, very important matters, and that the opportunity is there for a very constructive, broad international cooperation. The problem, as Ed is indicating from by asking me to speak, is political. Is the will there to do it? And I think that would certainly be there in the case of the Russians. There may be other countries like China, or again, I'm not sure what to make about Canada. I'd have to leave that to Matt to get his perspective on that. With regard to the United States, the problem has always been, for quite some decades now, a political one, and really a personnel problem. That you have people who are in charge of policy who are not particularly amenable to constructive ideas like this that concern the Russians, because they're not open to constructive work with the Russians. Even such things as we have, for example, like the International Space Station, are legacy things from the Soviet period, which oddly enough, there was more American openness to such cooperation then in the tail end of the first Cold War than there is now in what appears to be a second Cold War. Now, if we are anticipating either improbably a second Trump administration or more likely Biden administration, will that change? What are the prospects? I do think it is important, and I don't want to put too fine a point on this, is that if there is an Israeli angle here, if there are voices in Israel, which, as we know, looms rather large in American foreign policy thinking, can that in some way be catalytic in getting some part of the political class in Washington to think a little more constructively about how we might work with Russia in a way that benefits many people in so many regions of the world through initiatives like this? But that is the real task, I think, that we don't really have the answer to, and I certainly do not. But I think maybe part of the argument we have is that because these ideas are so compelling and so constructive, that somebody somewhere will see their value rather than simply staying in the rut that we've been in for so many years, where people are not open to these ideas because they've got other political priorities that consume their entire perspective on Russia.
Well, if you look, I mean, the problem that the United States has at this point is we have no vision for developing the world. That, I mean, as probably Matthew's presentation brings home the point that John F. Kennedy may have been the last president that had a vision, and that's almost 60 years ago. In fact, and I know John F. Kennedy was the last president who directly worked with Africa on development. So we have a problem. The United States does not look at these issues in a way that can solve them, because it would require thinking ahead into the future about what is possible. For example, on this TransAqua project, which I just briefly presented, the United States has no interest in it, except for the military. No political figure in Congress or president has ever even addressed this issue. But when the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. at Fort McNair, when they had a private seminar on this question, they asked me to come because I'm practically the only person in the United States who actually is concerned about this issue, which is very sad, because instead of having mass migrations of Africans dying as they try to cross the Mediterranean, why not make the Sahel hospitable by bringing in infrastructure, water, electricity? These are simple concepts that the United States used to think about 50, 60 years ago. I might be the oldest person on this panel, but this is something that in the 50s and 60s and even into the 70s we were thinking about, and now this is gone. And I think that the Russians have a different approach. The Chinese have a very aggressive, different approach. And I think if we could find a way of changing the US to join with these other two powers, we could really make these kind of changes possible. But whether it happens in the United States is an open question right now. It doesn't look good, but we have to try.
But I think that it's one of the reasons Israel has such good relations with China today. And officially they got relations in 1992, just to give people a sense of positivity. But as early as 1983, Israel and China went into two different water projects. And China risked their relationship with the Arab world because they needed them. So, I mean, today there are certainly projects in the United States. It's not just developing countries. You know, you think of the San Joaquin Valley in California or the Southwest. There are people that really need a more water perspective. They need water infrastructure. So I think that the U.S. is eventually going to need this. And you know, when we think of countries like Syria, that I think in part collapsed because of the water drought of 2006 to 2010. And then in 2011, the war started, partly because people just didn't trust, the Alawites couldn't trust the Sunnis anymore. I think you could see a bunch of countries simply collapse from just water scarcity. That's,
if I may,
sorry.
Yeah, sorry. You know, if I may just comment on what was said recently, because we do agree that the lack of infrastructure is one of the big problems. Whether you want to transfer water, if you want to desalinate water, if you want to use ionization of the atmosphere, and all these things require infrastructure, both power, you know, transport, but there is a problem here we have is that it's the discussion is very US-centric, American-centric, in a sense that instead of pushing the United States, we can pull the United States into something like, for example, the Belt and Road Initiative, where now we have 136 nations are actively involved in that, including Russia, together with China. And by inviting the United States into that kind of cooperation, by bringing the knowledge of what is going on around the world with the Belt and Road Initiative, China's cooperation with many other nations in water, infrastructure, power, these can, if that is brought to the American people, American policymakers, rather than seeing it as a threat, they can see it as an opportunity to participate in changing reality, you know, around the world. And the United States itself can benefit, but what it will do also is it will rejuvenate this idea of having a vision, which Larry said, you know, President Kennedy probably was the last one who had such a grand vision of doing something of that scale. But things of that scale are taking place around the world. Foremost, of course, in China, but China is doing that kind of things in Africa, for example. So I think what has been presented here is excellent. It's just that we need to agree on, you know, what is necessary to do and how to bring that to policymakers, but also to the population in different countries, especially the United States, because the United States' role is, of course, important. But by just looking that the United States is not doing anything doesn't mean that the rest of the world is not doing anything. So by pointing...
I'm not disputing that. I certainly don't dispute that the United States, I mean, first of all, a lot of other countries are involved in water projects, and that's a great thing. I hope that Russia and Israel can be the drinking fountain of the East, and Russia being the drinking fountain of Eurasia. I mean, they certainly have the resources to do it. And
this is why, Hussein, this is why, remember when we started this thing, I said that we are here in Washington, Jim and I, and we are trying so far, not with great success, somehow to move Washington into this direction. And we have this little, you know, project, and perhaps it will grow into some grassroots movement. This, by the way, today is, I think it's our fourth session, and we have plan more to come in different areas. So I would really encourage all of you simply to spread the word. If you have some short presentation, which we can use for our Washington Times monthly message to the Washington establishment, this would be great. Has to be like maybe 1-2 paragraphs, and then so there will be not just only crying into the wilderness, but delivering message, straight to Washington. It's a unique opportunity. So please, just again, think of some other ideas, not just water, but other ideas. Bring more people, and think, spread, especially if some of you are working at the universities, we would like to involve young people. Hopefully, some of the young people are watching this. By the way, I didn't mention this to people, first-comers, that this project is a joint US-Russia project from the United States. It's American University in Moscow, and from Russia, it's probably one of the most leading Russian nuclear university. It's called National Research Nuclear University. It's a university which trains future atomic nuclear experts. And it's on the agenda. Students from this university are obligated to watch our discussions. It's part of their curriculum. So we do what we can. We need your help. Our next session is scheduled, it's every 2 weeks, so it will be December 3. And we will think about the subject because Matt suggested 10 different proposals. We will choose one of them, or maybe we'll probably talk about what's going on in Washington. We still don't know who is our president. So it's still today, but as a matter of fact, while we had our session, exactly the same time, Trump lawyers had a news conference saying that they know that it will be Trump who will be the next president. It's interesting. Well, we shall see. Well, I want to thank you. I see a lady with name Svetlana. She's on. I don't know if she just listening or wants to say something. Svetlana, do you hear us? Svetlana? No, probably she's just, okay. She probably just wants to hear, not to say something. Anyone else wants to add a few lines?
I would like just to suggest that every one of us can write down a summary of their presentation, their proposals,
right,
in writing, and then they can be put together in, because I can already see that there are so many wonderful proposals on how to work on these matters, what kind of technologies, what kind of initiatives. And if we can send it, I can send my part to you in writing. I think the others should write short summary of what they presented, what they thought is a reasonable solution for certain problems, either regional or global. But I think we should make it like a systematic way of putting together the material.
Yeah.
You suggest we send that to Ed?
Yeah, it's a great idea. And Ed, like you and I were talking too, I think it's a good idea to think about, since we want increasingly students to tune into these things and to really engage in a mental dialogue with each other and with us. Maybe thinking for all of the speakers who are able to think about an essay topic or questions for students to wrestle with and to engage their minds, I think would be a fun experiment, and see if students actually produce thoughts or essays that they can submit to you that you can maybe feature on your website or something like that as an incentive.
Good. I like what Jim said about Israel's role, and also Robert, because Israel, it's probably a unique country which has millions of Russians, and the United States has millions of Russians. Russia has definitely millions of Russians. So maybe Israel can be like a country, and sometimes Israel create problems, but maybe this time Israel maybe be like a peacemaker on the positive side.
Isn't Israel the world's expert on drip agriculture, drip irrigation?
Yes, it is.
It's interesting that Bibi Netanyahu lived in my building. When he worked in the Israeli embassy, he rented apartment, and so we had sometimes tea, coffee, and talked about things. So maybe he remembers me from those days. I'll try to get a message to him. I'm often on Israeli TV, so I already criticized him a few times. So maybe he will respond and do something.
Well, yeah.
Jim,
well, if we have other countries that are maybe starting to work on these projects, and the Americans see that these trains are leaving the station, maybe that creates some kind of impetus for them to say, let's jump on board. On the other hand, depending on the kind of people we're talking about, like a Mike Pompeo or a Michelle Flournoy, maybe that simply stimulates them to say, hey, that train's leaving the station, let's derail it. And deal with it kind of like we look at, say, Nord Stream 2 or something. What could we do to shut this thing down? But again, I don't think I'm giving away a state secret here by noting that the political class in Washington on both sides of the aisle tends to be rather deferential toward Israel. So maybe we have a project and there's a nice Israeli shell around it that's perceived in Washington as this is an Israeli thing. Maybe that affords you some protection against the kind of let's derail the train that might work before if it were just a Russian or a Chinese or even a Canadian project.
I think definitely on the Republican side it would. As for the Democrats, if this is an issue that deals with the environment or how it can better the environment,
Sure,
you would think the Democrats would be able to get
too. Yeah.
So that could be a shell of its own. I think where Russia could make a huge difference is in two areas where Israel might be interested. One is that Russia has very good relations with Syria because they've been their protector in the Security Council. And obviously Russian planes and Israeli planes could potentially clash in Syria. So anything that could help in terms of bringing water infrastructure to Syria, I think would definitely stabilize the situation on the Israeli-Syrian border. I think the Israelis would get on board right away. And the other area where I think that Israel and Russia could be is Hamas and Gaza. Gaza has, going back to the idea of the barrier between salt water and fresh water, they've overpumped their aquifer. And I think Russia, they might be willing to listen if Russia were to mediate, as opposed to they will not talk to the US, the Palestinians, or they don't want to. But they might be willing to listen to Russia because Russia actually has relations with Hamas.
I wanted to ask you about that. Their aquifer is been overused. So how are they dealing with that aquifer, which is got to be producing less and less water and more salt?
Correct. So it's about as of a few years ago, it was like 97%. And I remember reading in 2017 that as early as 2020, Gaza could become unlivable. Now, it hasn't happened yet, in part because there was some quiet cooperation between an Israeli company, WaterGen, and Hamas. So WaterGen, again, is the company I mentioned earlier that deals with atmospheric water generation, which is actually a very 50-year-old technology. It's not just the Israelis who do this specific technology. But when we think of, by the way, when we think of Flint, Michigan, which obviously was also destroyed by water technology, that also would be a very relevant technology for Flint, Michigan, because just the idea of if you don't trust the water coming from the pipes, you might want to think of water coming from the air. So that could be actually another area that the Democrats specifically might be interested in.
Hey, Robert, I've got a quick question for you on this issue. Is this the same thing as like cloud seeding, or are you dealing now with the like atmospheric rivers and how the ionosphere shapes the atmospheric rivers and induces them to like fall over land instead of over, let's say,
no, it's literally from the air. That is, you actually
like
generate. So to anyone who understands the idea of when we were in 5th grade science, when we talked about evaporation and condensation, you evaporate something, water becomes air. Obviously, the process can be reversed. So it's the equivalent of having. So I can present to you the company, and they have these 3 types of units. One is for your home, one is for basically a large group of people, and one is for practically 100 people, where you can actually build these units. And you don't even have to build them. You can just simply buy them and bring them to the city and provide enough water for people to drink on a daily basis. And this is, the Israelis developed this technology because there are times when you're in a country that is constantly at war, the idea is your infrastructure will be destroyed. Therefore, you have to have an ability to be mobile, to bring a unit that can be online and bring you and replicate. It's almost like replicate water very quickly.
You got to send a link. I find this fascinating. I haven't looked into this at all.
I think I've seen one of these water trucks that just suck the water out of the air and then people go over and drink from it. I think I saw one.
Absolutely. I'll be glad to show. I will email the presentation. Ellen Dershowitz actually is on the board of WaterGen. He gave a wonderful presentation in 2017. And it actually showed the unit and creating the water at that moment. And I think that would be a huge game changer. Not just, I mean, think of another thing relevant for the United States. It's not just Flint, Michigan. Think of Puerto Rico during Hurricane Maria in 2017. Half of the population of Puerto Rico for quite some time did not have water. They were out of power, they were out of water. And so for disasters like hurricanes, like a Hurricane Katrina or Hurricane Harvey in Texas, this is something that I think Israel and Russia could be, they could help a lot of countries, and not just developing countries, but developed countries as well.
Okay, well, I think it was great discussion, and want to thank everyone. I will send your agenda for December 3. And I agree with Hussein. If someone who has some ideas will write a short kind of a summary, we'll try to promote it, and let's start building this grassroots. I think we had great international, let me repeat, we had Washington, we had Germany, Stockholm, Sweden, Rochester, New York. Who else did we have?
Canada.
Canada. Yeah, it's terrific. So it's really, we started building this grassroots movement. I want to thank everyone, and see you in the future discussions, and let's stay in touch. I'll send everyone this inspirational article in Politica and my op-ed yesterday in Washington Times. Washington Post doesn't want this. Well, and I mentioned some of the things that we talked today. I mentioned this article, and Matt, thank you for helping editing all this stuff, and let's stay in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.